Hello friends, we'll be discussing certain details about the financial statements of not-for-profit organization. Another illustration will be discussed. This will be a little different illustration for your reference. So let's read it out, or rather, let's jot it down first and then we'll read it out simultaneously. So when we speak about the next illustration, this illustration is a little different from the earlier one. So what we'll be doing is that we'll be starting off with writing the illustration first, and then we'll figure out what exactly do we have as on or write the way when we start writing with that. So as of how we are starting writing with that same thing, similar to that, we'll go ahead and prepare all these things. So let's start with it first. So in this question, the balance sheet as of 1st of April 2017 for X Club, EXE Club basically, and the receipts and payments for the similar timing has been given here as of 31st of March 2018. So let's figure out what do we have in the balance sheet. So we have mentioned the liabilities and the amount side, or rather the asset side and the liability side. Let's figure out what do items or what are the items that are mentioned in here. So on the liability side, we have an item that is capital fund mentioned as 4,20,000. And we have creditor for stationery mentioned as 10,000. So why this illustration is different from the previous one is because in the previous illustration you had to prepare the balance sheet as a working note. Here you have already given with all these details. So we have premises on the asset side, furniture and bank balance that has been mentioned here. So the total of assets and liabilities comes to equivalent as 4,30,000. Now we'll see what do we have in the receipts and payments account. So we have mentioned the receipts on the debit side and the payments on the credit side. So accordingly, we'll go ahead and figure out what all items are mentioned in here. So the first item that has been mentioned here is to the balance that is brought down. Now this is the bank balance. That means if you see in the balance sheet, bank balance is 10,000. That is the opening balance that has been mentioned in here. So similarly, we'll have certain closing balance as well. Let's figure out first what do we have on the receipt side. The next item that has been mentioned here is to subscription 86,000. The next item that has been mentioned is to donation 33,000. And the last item when it comes to receipts is to sundry receipts 27,500. With this, we have cleared the receipt side. Now let's mention the items on the payment side. The first item that we have mentioned on the payment side is the electricity charge 12,000. The next item is the furniture 30,000. The next items that has been mentioned is by salary 60,000 and by creditors for stationery 25,000 has been mentioned. General expenses have been mentioned at 21,000 and the balance carried down, that is the closing bank balance, is 8,500. So the total of receipts and payment has been mentioned as 1,56,500. Now we'll be going ahead with the adjustments part. Now the first adjustment they have mentioned is on 30th of September 2017, old furniture was given away to Red Cross. So on 30th of September 2017, the old furniture was donated to Red Cross as mentioned in the question, and on 1st of October 2017, new furniture was purchased and depreciation was supposed to be provided at the rate of 10% on it per annum. Now, the last few details that I have mentioned here is on 31st of March 2018, creditors for stationery amounted to 4,800 and value of unused stock was 5,400. Also, a payment of 5,000 for stationery was supposed to be debited to general expenses. Now we have to prepare the income and expenditure part, and as well as we have to prepare the closing balance sheet as of 31st of March 2018. So let's start with the working notes first. Now, as you can see in the adjustment, the working note is only related to the creditors for stationery because the closing balances have been already mentioned. So we have to start with the credit note, or rather the working note for creditors for stationery itself. So the working note will now refer to creditors for stationery. So whatever balance we have been given in the receipts and payments, and whatever balance we have been given in the balance sheet, and the closing balance will be taken into consideration now. So let's prepare an account for creditors for stationery. So the first thing that we'll be doing is taking the balance. That means when you understand that creditors for stationery, what do you mean by creditors for stationery? That means someone has given us loan or someone is giving us funding for buying stationery. That means this is a liability account. So the balance that is mentioned in the balance sheet for creditors for stationery 10,000 will be brought down on the credit side. So we'll mention that on the credit side here. So we'll first bring the balance on the credit side now. So that is 10,000 has been brought down as of 1st of April 2017. Now we'll go with the next additions to it. Now, if we come in the current year receipts and payments, we have made creditors for stationery 25,000 payment has been made. Now, if the payment has been made, that means it is an expense that will be mentioned on the debit side of the creditors for stationery account. So let's mention it there. Now, apart from that, there was certain adjustment were mentioned that 9,000 or rather 4,800 was the closing balance. So rather we can talk about as of 31st of March 2018 closing balance was 4,800. So we'll mention that now. So after this, whatever balance is left will be the actual stock of stationery that we have, and that can be utilized to further figure out what is the closing stock of stationery that we have. That means opening stock of stationery is what we'll get from this thing. Out of that valuation of stock that was given in the adjustment, that will be utilized later on. So that is another working. We'll do that later on, but let's figure out what is the balancing figure. That will be the stock of stationery that we have. The total comes to 29,800, out of which the credit balance will be subtracted. So the balance 19,800 is the closing stock, or rather the stock that we have here. So that means by stock of stationery we have 19,800 as mentioned. Now we'll further use this amount itself for the next calculations. Now if you see in that adjustment, they've mentioned the value of unused stock being 5,400. That has been mentioned here. Now how to utilize that into this working will be the exact figure of working note here. So the next working will be related to consumption of stationery. How much stationery has been consumed. Now to figure out how much has been consumed, the closing stock is already that we know. Out of that, unused value will be subtracted. Out of that, there's one more adjustment that relates to something of the amount will be debited as general reserve. So that will be subtracted again. So whatever has been left is the consumed stock that we have. So stock of stationery credit purchase has been mentioned as 9,800 or 19,800 basically. Out of that, we'll subtract the unused value of stock. So that means out of that much of amount, unused stock has been subtracted. Amount that is supposed to be debited to the general expenses has been also subtracted. That gives us a total of 10,400. Balance will be the stock that has been consumed for which we have made the payment, and that will be transferred to or debited to income and expenditure account. So 9,400 worth of stationery has been consumed, and that will give you the exact figure, or rather that is supposed to be transferred to income and expenditure account. So let's now prepare the income and expenditure account in detail. So now here we'll always consider revenue items which are related to expense and income both. So out of that question, or rather the receipts and payments that were provided to us. So out of the items that were provided into the receipts and expenditure, or rather receipts and payments account, only revenue items are to be taken and jotted down here or mentioned down here. So let's start with the first thing. Let's start with the creditors for stationery that we are supposed to transfer amounting to 9,400. So income side is very easy to prepare in this illustration because there is nothing related to adjustments of this. So we'll first put down the income part here and then clear out that thing first. So by subscription we have 86,000 as mentioned. By donation we have 33,000, and by sundry receipts we have certain amount. So by subscription, by donation, and by sundry receipts we have all these amounts mentioned here. So the income side is almost clear. Let's mention on the expense side. So all the revenue expenses will be taken care into consideration right now. So in that receipts and payments column, we have electricity charges, we have salaries, general expenses in which certain things has to be added. So let's start with the electricity charges first, because consumption of stationery has been already mentioned. Now only these two items were there whereby there is no adjustment, no addition, no subtraction to be done. Now if we consider furniture, that is the new furniture that has been purchased. So on that 10% depreciation has to be provided, and the earlier furniture which was worth rupees 20,000 as mentioned in the balance sheet has been sold out. So that has been completely sold out here. So we'll take that into consideration first. Now that 20,000 will be a donation, so it is an expense for us because we are giving out completely free of cost. So we'll mention here as to furniture donation to Red Cross 20,000. So to furniture has been mentioned, donation as 20,000, that has been done here. Now as we are talking about furniture, depreciation was supposed to be provided at the rate of 10% from 1st of October 2017 until 31st of March 2018. We have to give out depreciation because new furniture has been purchased on 1st of October. So let's give the depreciation there because that is also an expense here. So that comes to a total of 1500 that we have mentioned. So we've completed all the adjustments related to the furniture now. Now the opening, or rather the furniture that we have, the net value, that means 30,000 minus 1500 depreciation, will be moved to the balance sheet that will be preparing after this account. Now, the last expense that we have here is the general expenses, 21,000. That means that was mentioned in the receipts and payments. We have to add another 5,000 to it because that was the value that was moved from the closing stock, or rather the stationery, to the specific general expense. So with this, we have completed all the items that are related to income and expenditure account. Let's figure out whether we have a surplus or a deficit here. We'll start with the interim balance first. So the credit side shows 146,500 and the debit side shows 128,900. So that means it's a clear case of surplus here. So 17,600 being surplus will be now added to the capital fund, which we have already derived, or rather which is already given to us in the opening balance sheet. Now, whatever capital fund has been given there, let's move it out to the closing balance sheet. We'll add the surplus there. Whatever additional items has to be placed, like furniture opening balance, or rather furniture new that has been purchased, out of that depreciation has to be subtracted and placed. Let's move to the closing balance sheet now. So we have mentioned the liabilities and the asset side. Let's start with the capital fund first. So the capital fund, as mentioned in the opening balance sheet, is 4,20,000. We have to add surplus in it. Now, the total capital fund plus surplus has been mentioned here. That is 437,600. Now, the closing value of creditors for stationery has been also given to us pre-handed. That is 4,800 in the adjustment. So let's mention that here. So creditors for stationery 4,800 has been mentioned. The next thing that we have to mention here is the specific asset side. So let's go on to the asset side now. So on the asset side, we first have premises, as it was mentioned in the opening balance, and that will be the closing balance here, 4 lakh rupees. Now, the next item will be furniture that was purchased on 1st of October, 30,000, out of which 1,500 is to be subtracted as depreciation. So out of the 30,000, 1,500 is to be taken off as depreciation. That gives you a total of 28,500. Now, the unstock sold, or rather we can use, or rather we can talk about unused stock of stationery, amounted to 5,400. That has to be mentioned here. And the last item that has to be mentioned here is the closing bank balance, that is 8,500. So with this, we have mentioned all the items here. Now we need to figure out whether the liability side tallies the asset side or not. If it doesn't, that means there is something wrong. If it does, then the sum is absolutely correct. Now, the asset side total comes to 4,42,400. Now, we need to figure out if the liability side total comes to the same value or not. So with this, we need to figure out, or rather we have already figured out, that the liability matches the asset, with 4,42,400 being the tallied amount. So here, the illustration is correct, the calculations are correct, the working has been done, and with this, we mark the closure of this specific illustration. So I hope this illustration gave you the idea about, if the balance sheet has been already given, if the receipts and payment account has been given with certain adjustments, how to go ahead with the preparation of working notes, income and expenditure account, and the closing balance sheet. This is how you can trick, or rather you can deal with this tricky problem whenever or whatever time you want to. So please look into this, or rather please deal with all these sums with extra care, especially when small informations, or rather informations related to certain pointers, are given in the illustration itself or in the question itself, because here the tricky part was the consumption of stock. That was the most tricky part, and that you need to understand every time whenever you're going to solve this, because you won't be having this much of time to solve each and every illustration. You have to do it orally, you have to do it on calculator basis. So make sure all these illustrations are done with the trick of mind and using all these concepts that we are supposed to deal with at one single point of time. So thank you for watching this video. Stay tuned with Ekeeda and keep subscribing to Ekeeda.